Okay, let's start with a question. Have you ever, really stopped to think about who actually writes the laws? The ones that shape, everything around us. Or maybe if the politicians we vote for, if they're truly the ones calling the shots, holding the real power.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
A bit unsettling, maybe.
Right, because there's this provocative idea out there
Yeah.
that maybe a lot of what we see in politics, the elections, the debates, all that stuff, maybe it's more like, well, theater, an elaborate performance.
Yeah, like a show designed to keep us focused on the stage, while the real action, the actual writing of the script,
Yeah.
happens somewhere else, behind the curtain.
Exactly. So welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a set of sources that offer let's say, a very specific and pretty stark view on how political power might really work. Our mission here is simple. Unpack these claims, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to understanding this alternative perspective. It's definitely challenging.
It is.
The material we're looking at comes from excerpts of a work called The Deep State's Global Agenda. And it's a pretty critical look at traditional political structures. It definitely pushes back against a lot of common assumptions about democracy and how government works.
And that's what we'll be exploring. We're going to walk through the arguments, look at the evidence as presented in these sources. We want to give you a structured way to engage with these, frankly, quite powerful ideas. We'll touch on claims about politicians maybe being more symbolic than powerful, the forces that are supposedly really behind the laws, and this idea of policies looking strangely similar all around the globe.
Yeah, that global alignment point is fascinating.
It is. And we really encourage you, listening, to approach this with a critical mind. Not necessarily to buy into everything, but just to think about it. Who holds the influence? How might it work?
Totally agree. Because honestly, whatever your own politics are, understanding these kinds of claims, it gives you a different lens, doesn't it? For looking at current events, for hearing political talk.
Yeah.
You might just have a few aha moments, or at least some new questions to chew on. Okay, so let's unpack this.
The theatrical face of power.
Right. Let's kick off with this core idea that really hits you right away. It challenges everything we think we know about democracy. The main claim from our source is that this whole notion of politicians having real decision-making power, it's called, and I'm quoting here, a persistent myth.
A myth? Wow.
Yeah. And the source argues it's a useful myth, but only really for keeping things as they are, maintaining the status quo.
So it's not just saying politicians are ineffective sometimes or, influenced by lobbyists. It's saying the whole premise of their power is flawed.
Exactly. It's fundamental. It makes you ask, well, if they aren't the ones really deciding things, then what are elections for?
Right. All that money, all that time, the campaign.
Now, the focus, it kind of reframes it all, doesn't it? Maybe elections are less about choosing leaders based on policy and more about picking actors, people good at playing a certain role.
That's a provocative way to put it. And the source actually goes on to detail what it sees as their actual roles, not the ones we usually assume. It lists three main functions.
Okay, what are they?
First, politicians are described as managers of public opinion.
Okay, managing public opinion. What does that mean in this context? Like PR?
Sort of, but deeper, apparently. It's not just about selling a specific policy. The source suggests it's about shaping the whole environment of public thought.
Ah, like setting the agenda, deciding what we even talk about.
Precisely. Influencing how people perceive issues, what's framed as important, what's ignored, maybe long before a specific bill is even on the table.
Okay, how would they do that?
Well, the source hints at things like carefully crafted speeches, strategic media drops, maybe controlling the flow of information, all designed to steer public feeling in a pre-approved direction rather than actually responding to it.
Interesting. Okay, what's the second role?
Second, they're called agent for the implementation of the global agenda.
Global agenda. That sounds big. And maybe a bit vague.
It is somewhat abstract in the source, yeah. It's not like a detailed list of policies. But the implication throughout the book is there's this kind of coordinated, overarching set of goals that go beyond any single country.
Like on economics or climate?
Exactly. Things like economic restructuring, climate rules, aligning regulations internationally. Those seem to be the areas hinted at. And in this role, politicians aren't seen as the creators of these ideas.
There's implementing them.
Right, like local managers carrying out directives from head office. They translate these bigger, externally decided goals into national laws and actions.
Okay, so managers of opinion, agents of implementation. What's the third one?
This one's probably the most controversial. They're labeled mouthpieces of the deep state.
Ah, the deep state. That term carries a lot of baggage. How does the source define it? Is it like spies and shadows?
Not exactly like a thriller movie, no.
Yeah.
It's presented more as a complex network. Think powerful corporate interests, an influential technocratic elite.
Technocratic elite,
Yeah.
meaning
People with specialized knowledge, experts in key positions, but who aren't elected. Think top bureaucrats, advisors, people in regulatory agencies maybe, plus other unelected power centers that pull strings without public accountability.
okay, so a network of unelected influence.
Yes. And politicians, in this view, are the ones who basically voice the narratives and goals coming from this network.
So they give it a public face, make it sound legitimate.
That seems to be the idea. They articulate what these deep state forces want, said, creating a sort of acceptable front for power structures that are otherwise hidden.
Wow, that's quite a different picture of a politician's job description.
It really is. And it prompts you, the listener, to think, right, where might you see these alleged roles playing out? In the news, in speeches, in policy debates you follow. Do any examples jump out that seem to fit these descriptions? 2, unelected architects, think tanks, and transnational agendas.
Okay, so if politicians are potentially just playing these roles,
Mm,
managing opinion, implementing stuff, being mouthpieces, then the obvious next question is, well, who's really running the show? Who's writing the script?
exactly. And this is where the source makes a really significant shift. It points away from the elected officials we see.
And towards these other entities, powerful but unelected.
Right. Institutions that operate largely outside the voting booth, but according to this book, have huge, maybe even decisive influence on laws and policies.
Okay, this sounds like where it gets really interesting. Who are these entities?
Well, the source names several, but it puts a lot of emphasis on the World Economic Forum, the WEF.
Ah, Davos. Yeah, most people have heard of that. The big annual meeting.
Right, with all the CEOs, politicians, academics. But the source argues the WEF's influence goes way beyond just hosting a conference.
How so?
It's portrayed as a major force in shaping global conversations through its reports, like the annual Global Risks Report,
Mhm.
and through big initiatives like the Great Reset. That got a lot of attention.
Mm.
But here's the kicker. The claim isn't just that they talk about this stuff. The source says the WEF directly influences economic, climate, and social policies in dozens of countries.
Directly influences, not just advises.
That's the claim. It suggests a level of direct impact on actual national policy that kind of bypasses the usual democratic routes.
So a non-governmental group, basically a forum, is potentially acting like an upstream policy factory.
That's the picture painted, yeah. How does an NGO get that kind of reach? That's the implied question.
Are other groups mentioned?
Yeah, briefly, it also flags other influential think tanks, suggesting they play similar roles, though maybe with less detail in this particular text, like the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, in the U.S.
Right, big foreign policy think tank.
The Brookings Institution, known for its policy research,
Also very well known.
and Chatham House in London, the Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Okay, so established, respected institutions.
Exactly. And the book implies these places, much like the WEF is portrayed, are significant policy shapers behind the scenes through their research, their networks, their discussions with policymakers. The common thread, from the source's angle, is their power to frame issues and generate the policy options that governments later adopt.
Okay, so think tanks setting the intellectual stage. The source gives any concrete examples of unelected bodies having direct power.
It does. It uses the European Commission as a prime example.
Ah, the executive branch of the EU.
Exactly. Responsible for proposing laws, implementing decisions for the EU, and as the source points out, it's run largely by unelected technocrats, experts appointed, not voted in by the public.
Okay, and the claim is?
The claim in the deep state's global agenda is pretty staggering. It says these unelected officials draft something like 80 to 90% of the laws that govern Europe.
80 to 90%, seriously.
That's the figure given. And then, the source adds, these laws go to the national parliaments across Europe,
The elected representatives.
who then, quote, merely rubber stamp without debate.
Wow, just
Huh.
rubber stamp, no real discussion or changes.
That's the stark picture painted. Now, obviously, that's a controversial take on the EU legislative process, but it's presented as a clear example of unelected power driving legislation.
So think about what that implies for, say, national sovereignty within the EU or democratic accountability.
Exactly. If your elected MPs are just signing off on laws written elsewhere, without real debate, where does the power actually reside?
It suggests, in that context at least, that the democratic mechanisms might be more ceremonial than substantive.
That's certainly the implication the source draws from that example.
Hmm.
The real lawmaking power, in this view, is far removed from the citizen's vote.
Hmm.
3, the true authors of legislation, beyond the ballot box. And that connects directly to this next major point from the source. The idea that politicians never write laws themselves.
Never. That sounds absolutely.
It's stated very bluntly. And it's a crucial part of their argument because it completely cuts against that image we have, right? Of politicians working late, drafting bills, fighting for clauses.
Yeah, the Schoolhouse Rock version of lawmaking.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So if that's not happening, it suggests the whole legislative process starts somewhere else entirely, somewhere outside of direct public input or control.
It implies the very substance of the law, the actual text, comes from, well, other people.
Right. It suggests the process is maybe more technical or specialized or even influenced by other interests right from the very beginning. Less about political will, more about who holds the pen.
Okay, so if politicians aren't writing the laws, according to this source, who is? Who holds the pen?
The book points to a few specific groups. First, specialized law firms.
Law firms, like corporate lawyers.
Firms that specifically focus on legislative drafting. The source suggests they're not just advising, they're often paid to write the actual text of bills.
Huh. So the wording, the structure, the legal nuances that could be shaped by lawyers whose main job is technical drafting, maybe serving specific clients.
That's the implication. Legal precision, or maybe even specific corporate viewpoints, could be baked in from the start, potentially overriding broader democratic considerations.
Okay, who else?
Then there are the career bureaucrats.
Right, the civil servants. We mentioned them in the deep state context.
Exactly. These are the long-term officials who serve the state, regardless of which party is in power. They have the institutional knowledge, the technical expertise.
The understanding of how things actually work procedurally.
Yes, and the source claims their loyalty is often more to the system itself, to the continuation of established agendas, rather than to the politicians who come and go. They provide continuity for the underlying deep state agenda, as the book calls it.
The steady hand on the tiller, regardless of the captain.
Kind of. Ensuring consistency. But then it gets even more direct. The source also highlights private organizations tied to powerful industries.
Okay, now we're talking lobbying, but maybe more direct.
Potentially, yes. It explicitly names sectors like pharmaceuticals, military, energy. The strong suggestion isn't just that they lobby about laws, but that they are involved in shaping the text of the laws.
So embedding their interests directly into the legislation itself?
That's the claim. Designing the rules to benefit their business models, secure advantages, or avoid regulation right from the drafting stage. So certain laws might inherently favor specific corporate interests over the public good.
Okay, and there was one more group.
Yes. NGOs funded by billionaires, non-governmental organizations.
Right, like foundations or advocacy groups. Examples given.
It mentions names like George Soros or the Gates Foundation as examples of the kind of funding sources involved.
Okay, so major philanthropic players.
And the source raises serious questions about this. It suggests that through these well-funded NGOs, the specific agendas or priorities of very wealthy individuals can effectively become public policy, nationally or even globally.
So private money influencing public law through nonprofits.
Essentially, yeah. Channeling a private vision into law, potentially bypassing the usual democratic checks and balances. Shaping society according to the goals of a few very rich individuals.
That's quite a list of potential authors. Law firms, bureaucrats, industry groups, billionaire-funded NGOs. Quite different from the elected politician.
Very different. And the source says, look, here's the clear proof. Just examine modern laws themselves.
How so? What's the proof in the laws?
It points to their sheer length and complexity. Often over 1,000 pages long, it says, written in dense, opaque legal jargon.
Yeah, you definitely hear about massive bills nobody has read.
Exactly. The source argues this complexity makes it impossible for almost anyone, especially a busy politician, to fully grasp the content or the consequences.
Let alone debate it meaningfully.
Right. And then there's the speed of passage. It notes these huge, complex laws often get passed within hours, with little to no time for reading, let alone real scrutiny.
Suggests it's kind of pre-cooked, doesn't it?
That's the implication. A streamlined process, not careful deliberation. And the source adds that even top legal scholars struggle to interpret their implications.
So complex, rushed, hard to understand even for experts.
Yeah. How does that square with your experience? When you hear about a massive new law passed quickly, does this description resonate at all?
It certainly makes you think about transparency, doesn't it? How can the public or even representatives understand the rules if they're written like this and pass so fast?
That's precisely the point the source is making. It suggests a fundamental lack of accessibility and democratic oversight right at the core of the legislative process. 4. The capture of power, lobbying and influence.
Okay, so building on this idea of laws being written by unelected groups, the source then introduces this concept that political power isn't just influenced by these groups, it's actually captured.
Right, captured. That's a strong word. It goes beyond just lobbying, doesn't it?
Yeah, lobbying feels like, well, trying to persuade from the outside. Captured sounds like the special interests are inside the system, pulling the levers directly.
Exactly. It implies a much deeper integration, where private interests aren't just asking for favors. They're actively steering the ship, directing policy for their own benefit.
Maybe blurring the lines between public service and private profit.
That seems to be the core idea. A system where the machinery of the state is effectively co-opted by powerful private players. And the source gives some specific examples of who these players are.
Okay, let's hear them.
First up, the classic example, the military-industrial complex.
Right. Eisenhower warned about that decades ago.
Indeed. The source names specific big players, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, huge defense contractors.
Okay. And the claim about capture.
It's pretty bold. The source alleges these companies literally write defense policy.
Literally write it, not just advise on it.
That's the claim. Through detailed reports, policy recommendations, they submit directly to defense committees and governments, things like that.
Okay. And what's the payoff for them, according to the source?
Simple. Securing massive, often no-bid contracts for their weapon systems, their technology, their services.
Ah, so it's a feedback loop. Write the policy that says we need X, then sell X to the government.
Precisely. Write the policy, get the contracts, reinforce your influence, repeat. It paints a picture where defense policy might become less about national security strategy developed independently and more about generating revenue for these companies.
Okay, that's a powerful example. Who else?
Next, big pharma. Major pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer, Moderna, GSK are mentioned as examples.
Right. Companies involved in drugs, vaccines. Very relevant recently.
Very. And the source accuses them of directly influencing key regulatory bodies. The World Health Organization, WHO, the FDA in the US, the European Commission.
Influencing the regulators who are supposed to oversee them.
Yes. And it goes further. It claims they co-write health laws. Again, involved in the actual drafting.
Co-writing health laws.
Right.
Specific examples of policies they drive.
The source points to things like pushing for vaccine mandates and crucially securing legal immunity from adverse effects for their products.
Ah, the liability shield. That was a big point of discussion.
Exactly. So the source presents this as a situation where the companies profiting massively from certain health policies are also deeply involved in writing the rules for those policies and protecting themselves legally. Raises huge conflict of interest questions, obviously.
Yeah, big time. If the profit motive is shaping health policy, okay, who's the third power center?
This one's maybe less obvious. The academic lobby.
The academic lobby. You mean universities?
Specifically, elite universities.
Mm-hmm.
Harvard, Oxford, Sciences Po are given as examples, famous institutions.
Okay, how are they part of this capture? They're about education research.
Well, the source views their role differently. First, it says they produce the technocrats, the experts, the administrators who are, quote, loyal to the state order. They train the people who then go into these positions of influence within the system.
Okay, supplying the personnel.
Right. But also, these academics and intellectuals are seen as crucial for justifying the globalist agenda.
Justifying it.
By crafting the narratives, doing the studies, providing the expert opinions that make complex or maybe controversial policies seem necessary, logical, palatable to the public, as the source puts it.
Ah, so using the credibility of academia to provide legitimacy for certain policies.
That's the framework presented. It suggests that even seemingly objective expert opinion can be, perhaps subtly, part of the machinery of narrative control, making the public accept agendas decided elsewhere.
That really makes you think about the relationship between experts, government, and public trust, doesn't it? The idea of neutral expertise being challenged.
It certainly does. It questions where the ideas we take as expert consensus actually come from and whose interests they might ultimately serve, according to this source. 5. Global legislation. A copy-paste model.
Okay, so we've got these powerful unelected groups, industry, finance, maybe implicitly, academia supposedly capturing policy areas. The source then zooms out a bit, right? To look globally.
Yes, it makes this really interesting observation about national sovereignty. It basically says, look, if governments were truly independent, acting purely in their own specific national
Then
interests.
their laws would look really different from each other, country to country.
Exactly. You'd expect diversity reflecting different cultures, histories, priorities, but the source argues that's not what we see.
Okay, what do we see, according to them?
We see a surprising alignment of policies across many nations in really important areas.
Yet what?
Things like health policies, tax policies, and especially environmental policies. It gives examples like carbon taxes appearing in many places, similar restrictions on energy use, this widespread push for a green transition.
All looking remarkably similar across different countries.
That's the claim. Not just similar goals, but similar mechanisms, similar language, similar timelines. It suggests this isn't just countries independently arriving at the same solutions to the same problems.
It suggests something more. Coordinated.
Yes, deliberate coordination,
Yeah.
a shared blueprint being rolled out.
And how does the source explain this? How does this coordination happen?
It uses this phrase, the copy-paste phenomenon,
Copy paste, like literally taking a law from one place and dropping it into another.
pretty much. It claims laws are adopted with minimal changes across member states of big international organizations of the OECD, the EU, the UN are mentioned.
Okay, those are major standard setting bodies. Do they give an example?
Yeah, a specific one mentioned is an anti-disinformation law. It says it was passed first in France and then essentially mirrored in Canada, Germany, Australia, etc.
Wow. The same complex law popping up quickly in different legal systems around the world.
That's presented as strong evidence of this top-down coordinated lawmaking that bypasses national specifics. Makes you question how independent national legislatures really are in some areas.
Absolutely. So what's the source's explanation for why this happens? Where does the original come from before it gets copied?
This links back to the earlier points. The source claims these laws are drafted upstream in these globalist think tanks.
Okay, so places like the WEF or similar groups are originating the policy templates.
That's the suggestion. Far away from national parliaments or public input. Then, allegedly, these policies get tested in one country.
Tested, like a pilot program.
Sort of. See how it works, gauge the reaction, maybe tweak it, and then once it's deemed ready.
It gets rolled out everywhere else.
Right. The source uses the analogy.
Uh,
Rolled out worldwide, like legal software.
Like legal software, that's a really potent image. Standardized, centrally designed, pushed out globally.
Exactly. It implies this highly organized, almost automated system for making laws internationally, completely changing how we might think about national parliaments just debating and creating their own laws from scratch.
It paints a picture of a very centralized global governance system operating behind the scenes.
That's definitely the implication. Prioritizing global alignment over national autonomy or diversity.
Physics.
Politicians' enduring role. Theater and narrative control.
Okay, so if laws are being drafted upstream, copy-pasted globally, influenced by captured interests, let's circle back to the politicians. What is their role in this picture if they're not writing laws or setting the real agenda?
Right. The source revisits this, and it describes elections, the cornerstone of how we think politicians get power, as potentially nothing more than a symbolic validation ritual.
Symbolic validation, meaning our vote just gives a stamp of approval to a system that's already running on its own track.
That's the implication. It suggests voting legitimizes the system and its direction, but doesn't fundamentally change that direction. It makes you ask, what power does my vote really hold if the big policy frameworks are already set?
Yeah, that's a challenging thought. And why can't politicians, once elected, just break away, do their own thing?
Well, the source argues they face huge constraints. Several are mentioned. First, party loyalty.
Towing the party line.
Exactly. It says they cannot go against their party or they're removed. Strong party discipline ensures they stick to the program, the established agenda. Dissent isn't tolerated, basically.
Okay, so party control, what else?
Second, it repeats the point that politicians often do not understand the complex laws they vote on.
Because they're too long, too technical.
Right. That lack of deep understanding naturally prevents them from challenging or changing the substance. They end up just voting yes or no on things they haven't fully grasped.
Makes sense. Any other constraints?
Yeah, a slightly more cynical one. The source claims politicians are often chosen for their charisma, not competence.
Ouch. So good on camera, good at speeches, but maybe not the best policy minds.
That's the suggestion. Prioritizing public appeal and the ability to deliver the script over actual legislative skill or governing ability, which, again, reinforces their role as performers rather than independent actors.
Did these constraints seem plausible? When you watch politics, do you see evidence of party pressure, complex bills being rushed, maybe a focus on personality over policy?
It definitely gives you a framework to think about those things you observe, doesn't it?
It does. And all these constraints, the source argues, lead to this thing it calls the same agenda phenomenon.
Right. The idea that it doesn't really matter who wins the election.
Whether it's left or right, different personalities?
Exactly. It name checks leaders like Trump, Macron, Biden, Trudeau, saying they all end up pushing the same agenda with slight aesthetic differences.
Wow, that's a huge claim. The same core agenda, just packaged differently.
That's the argument. The ideological fights we see, the different rhetoric, the communication styles, those are the aesthetic differences, maybe minor policy tweaks here and there.
But the underlying direction on big economic, social, global issues remains consistent.
That's what the source contends. It's all part of the performance, maintaining the illusion of choice and change while the real trajectory stays the same, keeping the public engaged in the drama.
Which brings us back to that core metaphor.
Yes. The source concludes this section with that stark quote, "The politician is ultimately an actor reading a script."
Just delivering lines written by someone else.
Precisely. It really hammers home the theatrical nature of the role, as presented in this book. It's not just a casual comparison, it's fundamental to their argument.
So if politicians are actors, it really forces the question, doesn't it? Who's the audience? Us, the public.
Presumably. Meant to be convinced, maybe comforted by the performance.
And maybe more importantly, who wrote the script? Who's the playwright behind the scenes, ensuring the story stays consistent no matter which actor is on stage?
That's the million-dollar question this whole perspective revolves around, isn't it? Shifting focus from the performers to the unseen authors of the narrative.
To 7.
Why the belief persists. Conditioning and narrative control.
Okay, so if this whole picture is even partially true, politicians as actors, laws written elsewhere, global agendas, it begs a really big question. Why do people still believe in the system?
Right. If it's all theater, why does the audience keep buying tickets, so to speak? Why does government retain legitimacy?
It's a fundamental question. How does the source explain this persistence of belief?
It puts a lot of weight on what it calls childhood conditioning.
Conditioning. Like we're trained to believe it from a young age.
That's exactly the argument. It says we're, quote, conditioned from childhood to accept concepts like voting power, the idea that public debate matters, the principle of representation.
So these pillars of democracy are presented not as realities, but as learned beliefs, ideas instilled in us.
Yes, constructs carefully embedded in our understanding of the world from early on. It shapes our whole mental framework about how society should work, making the existing system seem natural, inevitable, even desirable.
Without us necessarily questioning those base assumptions.
Exactly. It becomes the water we swim in.
And is this conditioning just something that happens when we're kids, or is it ongoing?
Oh, it's actively reinforced throughout life, according to the source, through several key channels.
Like what?
Well, it points a finger at state-funded media, suggesting it plays a role in promoting narratives that uphold the system's legitimacy.
How? By how they report things, what they focus on.
Could be selective reporting, framing issues in certain ways, emphasizing the democratic process itself as working, even if the outcomes seem predetermined, according to this view.
Okay. Media influence. What else?
Public schools get a specific mention for their role in, quote, glorifying representative democracy.
Teaching civics, history.
Right. Teaching a specific version of how government works,
Yeah.
often emphasizing its positive aspects and legitimacy, potentially downplaying alternative views or critiques like the ones in this source, building that foundational belief.
So media and education as key pillars reinforcing the belief system.
Yes. And ultimately, the source claims the state maintains broad control over the dominant historical, legal, and moral narratives.
Controlling the story, basically.
Yeah. Shaping how we understand the past, what we consider lawful or just, what we see as right or wrong. This overarching narrative control ensures the story of government as a generally benevolent representative force remains the dominant one, making it harder for alternative perspectives to gain traction.
It really makes you reflect, doesn't it?
Right.
How much of our own understanding of government, of our civic duty, comes from these institutions. Can you recognize elements of this conditioning maybe in your own education or in the news you consume? It's a challenging thought. 8. Unveiling the system's true nature. Control, not service.
So taking this whole critical perspective, the alleged inefficiencies, the hidden agendas, the narrative control the source, then offers this really blunt assessment of the state itself. It uses an analogy. It says,
Okay.
if the state were a business, it would have gone bankrupt.
Huh. Okay, that's pointed. Why? Because of debt.
Inefficiency.
Yeah, it seems to be highlighting the massive debt, the perceived waste, the often counterintuitive actions, things that just wouldn't fly in a normal business that has to be efficient and accountable to survive.
So it's using that analogy to argue the state isn't really operating under the principles it claims, like service or fiscal responsibility. Exactly. It suggests the state's observed behavior doesn't match up with a service provider or a well-run organization. Its actual priorities, the source implies, must lie elsewhere.
And does it specify what those priorities might be? What actions reveal this supposed true nature?
It does. It lists several actions that, from its perspective, show the state is fundamentally about control, not service.
Okay, like what?
For instance, the constant funding of wars.
How does that show control over service?
The argument is that pouring vast resources into foreign conflicts suggests priorities far removed from the direct well-being of citizens at home. It points towards power projection, geopolitical games,
Yeah.
maybe serving that military-industrial complex we talked about.
Rather than focusing purely on domestic needs.
Okay, right. It's presented as fundamentally contradicting the idea of a state fully focused on serving its own people.
What else?
Another point is the state's tendency to ban competition in core areas. It mentions money, law, police, etc.
Meaning the state insists on being the only provider of these things, no alternatives allowed.
Exactly. It maintains monopolies. Instead of allowing, say, competing currencies, private arbitration systems, or community defense groups, the state suppresses alternatives and asserts itself as the sole legitimate source.
Which, the source argues, is a sign of wanting control, not necessarily providing the best service.
That's the contention. A true service provider might welcome competition or innovation. A controller seeks monopoly.
Okay. And the ultimate expression of that control.
Is its willingness to impose itself through violence or the threat of violence?
Your police, military, the justice system.
Yes. The state's ultimate power rests on its ability to coerce, to enforce its rules and monopolies physically if necessary. This, the source argues, is the final proof that its fundamental nature is coercive control, not voluntary service.
So, funding wars, banning competition, using force. These are presented as indicators of the state's real function.
Correct. These points are marshaled to invite you, the listener, to look past the stated purpose of government and evaluate its actions through this lens of control. Does the behavior match the rhetoric of service, or does it suggest something else is driving the system? Outro. So if we pull all these threads together, the critique of politicians, the role of unelected entities, the global policy alignment, the narrative control, the focus on state power over service, the deep state's global agenda reaches a pretty definitive and maybe quite bleak conclusion. It states it very directly. No political savior is coming to rescue you.
Wow. No hope from within the system.
That's the message. It asserts that real fundamental change, the kind that would actually dismantle these power structures, will, quote, never come from within the system.
Because the system itself, including politicians, is designed to prevent that kind of change.
Precisely. Politicians in this view exist solely to legitimize illegitimate power and comfort the masses. They keep the show going, provide a sense of hope or engagement, but won't or can't change the underlying reality.
That really circles back to the core paradox, doesn't it? Which
Yeah.
the source summarized so powerfully in that quote.
Ah, yes, the one that really sticks with you.
Those who write the laws are never elected. Those who are elected don't know how to write laws.
Just cuts right through, doesn't it? It encapsulates the entire argument, the separation between the visible political stage and the hidden architects of the rules we live by. A very stark takeaway about where power truly lies.
So, if the system is seen as fundamentally captured and resistant to internal reform, what's the answer? Does the source offer any solution?
It does. But it's a solution that lies entirely outside the current system. It's presented as the only solution, and it's pretty radical.
Okay, lay it on us.
It proposes decentralization, shifting power dramatically away from central states, maybe towards local communities or even individuals, breaking up concentrated power.
Decentralization. Okay, what else?
It emphasizes individual sovereignty, meaning prioritizing personal autonomy, self-ownership, the right to make your own choices over state control.
Taking power back to the individual level.
Yes. It also mentions self-defense, which implies individuals needing to protect themselves and their interests privately rather than relying solely on state structures, which it sees as compromise.
Okay. Decentralization, individual sovereignty, self-defense, anything else.
And the most challenging part, perhaps.
Yeah.
It advocates for anarchy organized through market and voluntary interaction.
Anarchy. That word scares a lot of people. Sounds like chaos.
Well, the source seems to use it not to mean chaos, but the absence of coercive state rule. The idea is that order and essential services, security, justice, infrastructure, could emerge voluntarily through private agreements, community cooperation, and market mechanisms, rather than being imposed by a state monopoly.
So like private arbitration, community watch groups, competing service providers for things that the state now does, all based on voluntary participation.
That seems to be the vision, a society organized from the bottom up through free association and exchange without a central coercive authority. It fundamentally challenges the idea that we need a state for order and prosperity.
That is a profoundly different way of thinking about society.
It absolutely is. And it really sparks the question for you listening. What does that perspective trigger in your mind? It's not just about tweaking politics. It's a call to rethink the whole structure of society, to consider alternatives to centralized power that we often just take for granted.
Yeah. This whole deep dive, it really pushes you to question where power actually resides and maybe what other possibilities could exist outside the systems we know. Definitely gives us a lot to mull over.
For sure. A lot to think about.
Well, thanks for joining us for this exploration, this deep dive into a challenging perspective. We appreciate you tuning in.